One of the most painful experiences in life is when we struggle with something that we know is harming ourselves and we know is harming the people that we love, and yet we can't seem to find freedom from that behavior. Another experience that's just as painful is when we watch someone that we love deeply and care about, and they are struggling with a behavior that is harming themselves and harming us and harming the other people in their lives, and they just can't seem to find freedom from that behavior. And what I want to do in this video is to bring some clarity and some hope. And I want to bring clarity as to why it can be so challenging to overcome these behaviors. And I want to bring hope in once you understand what the challenge is, then you can find a path to freedom in the midst of that struggle. Hi everybody, this is Greg from Heart Tools, where we make it simple to build great relationships. And years ago, I went to see my doctor because I was concerned with several things in my life. And as I was talking about my concerns, she asked me, "How have you been sleeping?" And I said, "Well, sleep's pretty normal, actually. That doesn't seem to be a problem." And she said, "Well, I'm not so sure." So she sent me to a sleep clinic to get my sleep tested. And I went to the sleep clinic and they hooked all this stuff up to my head, and I was supposed to sleep the whole night through, and they were going to take readings on how well I slept. And after about 3.5 hours, they woke me up and said, "We want to put you on a CPAP machine for the rest of the night because we're afraid you're going to have a heart attack here in our sleep center." And it turns out I was waking up 81 times every hour. More than once a minute, I would wake up so that I could take a breath and then I'd fall back asleep, and I did that all night long, and I had no awareness of that was happening. And when I talked to my doctor, I described my sleep as pretty normal. I thought I was having normal night sleeps. Now, here's why I thought I had normal night sleeps, is because if I were to compare my 25-year-old self and how I slept with my 50-year-old self, and if that change happened like in one night, I would have known there's something really wrong here. The problem is the change happened so gradually over so many years that I never woke up thinking, boy, sleep was weird last night. It was a lot different than the night before, or it was a lot different from the week before, a lot different from the month before. And here's the reason why I talk about this, because it's an important principle that's going to help us find clarity as we look at finding freedom from the things that harm us. And that is this: whatever is normal to you is invisible to you, even if it's harming you. In fact, whatever is normal to you is invisible to you, even if it's killing you. And what I want to do is unpack 4 different levels of things that are happening in our lives where we have a difficult time finding normal. And that's going to help us understand why it's so hard to give up these behaviors that are hurting us and hurting the people we love. And hopefully will kind of give us a roadmap for growth and freedom. I am going to take you through 4 different levels of things that are going on in our lives that really make it challenging for us to quit behaviors that we know are harming us or harming the people that we love. And usually the only level that we're concerned with is the first level, and that is the level of behaviors. And there are 2 kinds of behaviors generally that concern us. The first kind is out of control behaviors. And so this could be something like overeating or drug and alcohol abuse or workaholism. We just can't seem to get away from the office no matter how much damage it's causing our relationships. Sexual addiction, where we're doing things sexually that transgress our values, that are harming our self-image and harming our relationships. Things like codependency, where we can't stop helping and rescuing other people, even though we're exhausted and we resent the people that we're helping, right? These out of control behaviors, anything that you don't stop doing, even though you know it's hurting you and others. And then there's a second set of behaviors that concern us, and those are over-controlled behaviors. And this could be things like anorexia. So instead of overeating, we control our eating to the point where we're starving ourselves to death. It could be sexual anorexia, where we just avoid sex as though it's the most dangerous thing in the world. It could be procrastination, right? Where I'm going to control, instead of being a workaholic, I'm going to control my work, and that way I'll never create a problem, right? So if I haven't started yet, of course it's not perfect. I haven't even started. If I haven't finished it yet, of course there's flaws there. I haven't finished it yet. Procrastination is an over-controlled behavior that can really damage our lives. Phobias are an over-controlled behavior. Things like agoraphobia, where we can't go outside and we just control our life by staying inside. Perfectionism is an over-controlled behavior. And both out-of-control behaviors and over-control behaviors cause problems in our life. Out-of-control behaviors tend to cause chaos. They tend to cause crisis. They create a life that's irresponsible, where we can't seem to finish the things we start and actually build a life that's going somewhere. Over-controlled behaviors are rigid. They tend to be empty, and they tend to be characterized by deprivation. And over-controlled behaviors tend to be a desert. Now, sometimes we can struggle with things on both sides. We can have some out-of-control behaviors that we struggle with and some over-control behaviors. Sometimes we have struggles just on one side of that, and then we tend to try to find balance by getting in a relationship with someone who struggles on the other side, and that usually doesn't work. But this level of behaviors is the one we're most concerned about. It's one that if I could give you a magic pill that would change your life, you'd say, I want to stop doing this behavior because it's hurting so much. And I don't want to minimize that, because I know, how painful this can be. And yet, as we look at the 4 levels, what we're going to find is it is the least important level to focus on, because it's really the level that's a symptom of things that are happening on the levels beneath it. So beneath this level of behaviors, there's another level, and that's the level of our emotional world. And on one side of this, there's a struggle that we have that we can build up a huge reservoir of painful emotions. And that's because if we experience something and it creates a painful emotion, it creates some anxiety or some shame or fear or sadness, and if we don't metabolize that emotion, if we don't process it, if we kind of just bury it down and try to ignore it, that emotion doesn't go away, it just stays underground. And so if we do that over and over again with a particular emotion because we just don't want to feel angry, or we just don't want to feel sad, or we don't want to feel lonely, then we end up building this deep well of emotional pain, and we don't even know it's there. Some of us wake up with more loneliness in our heart than the human heart was meant to endure. Some of us wake up with more shame than the human heart was ever meant to endure, and yet it's normal to us, and whatever is normal to us is invisible to us, even if it's hurting us. And then on the opposite side of this level, on the opposite side from the reservoir of pain, is a shortage of delight. You were meant to live with an abundance of positive emotion happening in your heart. You were meant to enjoy life, to have a sense of purpose, to feel excited about your job or about the next vacation or about the next stage in your life, to experience tenderness, to experience affection, to experience calm well-being. And for some of us, these positive emotional experiences are few and far between We get up and we go through our days and we hardly ever experience anything close to this. And what do we call it? We call it normal, because that's not much different than what yesterday was, or last week was, or last month was. Now, here's what happens. We have this level of emotions where I have all this abundance of pain, and I have all this lack and absence, shortage of delight, and this actually flows up into the behavioral level, right? Because here's the problem. We cannot store up a deep well of emotional pain without trying to find something to medicate it, right? I've got to find something that's going to numb all that shame, or numb all that loneliness, or numb all that anxiety that I experience, right? And we cannot endure not having these positive emotions. So I've got to find something that, at least for a few seconds, is going to substitute for this calm, well-being, tenderness, delight, enjoyment that I was meant to experience. I got to find some substitute for that, even if it, like later on, there's a price to pay for us. So the purpose of these behaviors that we can't quit is to help us cope with all these emotions that we don't want to experience and we don't know how to experience. And generally, on the out of control side, there can be a lot of emotions, but the predominant emotion that we're trying to deal with is shame. And we try to deal with it by medicating it. I'm just going to do something that makes me feel good for 10 minutes because I just want to feel good in this horrible, hard life that I have. And then on the over-controlled side, can be a lot of emotions, but it's usually dominated by fear. And so what I want to do with that fear is I want to try to do something that's going to box it up and bury it deep in a sea so I can just ignore it. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to either medicate our emotions or box them up and cut them out of our experience. And then there is a third level beneath the level of our emotional world, and that is the level of our relational patterns. What is the quality and kind of relationships that you're in on a day-to-day basis? And there's two sides to this also. So in our relational patterns, we can have the presence of destructive behaviors. We can have abusive behaviors or abandoning behaviors. We can have bullying behaviors, judgmental behaviors. Someone's always pointing out our problems, fixing behaviors. Someone's taking on themselves to tell us what we're doing wrong and how to fix it. And they have to give us advice because we're not smart enough to run our own lives. Lying and gaslighting, controlling, manipulating behaviors, rescuing behaviors. There are a whole host of destructive behaviors, and it is not a healthy relational pattern, and yet we call it normal because it's what we've been experiencing, not just for the last few days, but for the last few weeks, few months, few years, few decades. And what's normal to us is invisible to us, even if it's harming us. And all of these destructive behaviors will harm us if we allow them to become routine. Then on the opposite side of the presence of destructive behaviors is the absence of constructive behaviors, or perhaps we could say absence of nurturing behaviors. There are things that we are meant to experience, there are patterns that we're meant to experience that we rarely experience. For example, we were meant to have someone's attention, right? And when was the last time you had someone's undivided attention for 30 minutes or for an hour? We were meant to experience affection on a regular basis. We were meant to experience attunement, right? The sense that, boy, this person just really gets me and they know where I'm at. They're like tuned in to who I am. We were meant to experience apologies, right? If someone does something to harm us, we were meant to be in a relationship where they take responsibility of that and say, boy, I sure am sorry I did that. I regret having done that to you. We were meant to be in relationships where someone says on a regular basis, you know what I really like about you? You know what I respect about you? You know what I really enjoy about you? We were meant to be in relationships where someone can disagree with us and be respectful in their disagreements and not have a need to demonize us or caricature us. We were meant to be appreciated for who we are and for what we do. This is how we're meant to live, in these kind of relational patterns. And for some of us, it has been weeks, months, or years since we've experienced this on a regular basis, and yet we call it normal, right? Because we haven't experienced it for a long time. Why would I wake up today and say, boy, I can't wait for someone to be affectionate or attuned. I can't wait for someone to appreciate me today, because we haven't experienced it for a long time. It's just normal, and whatever is normal to you is invisible to you, even if it's harming you, even if it's killing you. And once again, there is a flow upward. There is a flow from the relational patterns that we find ourselves in and the emotions that we experience. If we're constantly experiencing these destructive emotional patterns, then we're going to feel a lot of loneliness or shame or sadness or anger, right? And if we don't experience all these positive emotional interactions that we were meant to live with, then we're going to have a barren emotional world in terms of the positive things, that we are actually meant to function with those things going on in our hearts all the time. And then finally, there's a fourth level of things going on in your world, and that has to do with your belief system. And there's a lot that we can unpack with belief system, but I want to focus in on just two things that really have to do with this struggle that we have to find freedom in the behaviors that we struggle with. And the first side of this is, I'm only lovable if. We have belief systems that say, for example, I'm only lovable if I'm helpful, or I'm only lovable if I'm funny. I'm only lovable if I'm smart or if I'm right. I'm only lovable if I'm sexual. I'm only lovable if I make a lot of money. I'm only lovable if I don't need anything from anybody, or if I don't cause problems and don't have wants. We can believe that we're only lovable if we achieve a certain criteria that qualifies us for being lovable. And then the second side of this is, I'm not lovable because, right? And sometimes we can think, I'm not lovable because that thing I did 20 years ago. And people who do things like that are never lovable. It doesn't matter that it was 20 years ago, I'm still not lovable. Or I'm not lovable because my mom left when I was 6, and moms don't leave lovable children. So since then, I've had just this sense in the back of my mind, not even aware of it, that I'm unlovable. I'm not lovable because I was abused, right? And abused people, the reason they're abused is because they're not lovable. And we have this deep set of hidden beliefs that we were never meant to believe about ourselves, and yet it is normal to us, and it is invisible to us, even if it's harming us and even if it's killing us. And once again, we find there's an upward flow from the things we believe to our relational patterns. Because if I'm not lovable, well, of course I'm going to put up with some of these destructive behaviors, right? If I was lovable, I'd put a stop to it. If I was worth something, I'd say, you can't treat me that way. But since I'm not really lovable anyway, I'm not going to create too much of a problem here. Of course, I don't expect a lot of positive, nurturing behavior, and I don't expect attention and affection and praise and apologies. I'm not worth those kind of behaviors, and I'm working hard to try to earn it, but I'm not there yet. And so because of our things that we believe about ourselves, it flows up, and we put up with relational patterns that are harming us. And because of that, we create a well of emotional pain, and there's an absence of delight. And because of that, we need these behaviors, because that's the only thing that's helping us, stay alive and cope with all the pain that we've stored up and all the lack of love and closeness and tenderness. And so we really can't quit those things. And then we can't quit them, and that goes all the way back down to the bottom and says, see, I'm really not lovable because I can't quit this thing. And the whole cycle continues over and over. So here's what happens. Of these 4 levels, then, we tend to focus in on this top level because it's the one that's the greatest evidence that we're not really lovable. And I think if I could just stop doing this stuff, then I would be acceptable and I would stop hurting people. And yet it's just a symptom of things going on beneath. And so I would suggest to you that the best place to focus, if you want to find freedom in an area, is to focus on the area of relational patterns. You need new relationships. You need healthy relationships. You need relationships where you're not experiencing all the bad stuff that causes pain and you're experiencing all the good stuff, right? And that's going to do a few things for you if you have healthy relationships. The first is you'll stop storing up all this pain that's being created by unhealthy relational patterns. The second thing is, if you're in relationships that are healthy and all of a sudden you realize, oh man, that person is really paying attention, or wow, they're really attuned to me, or wow, they just said something that shows how much they appreciate me. It's going to create more of the emotional delight that you were meant to experience. And then the third reason why you need healthy relationships, because all this reservoir of pain that you've stored up, that's going to need to be metabolized and processed and let go. And the only way you can do that is in relationship with healthy people. And so if you have a deep well of sadness, you're going to need healthy people to help you grieve, right? Or if you have a deep well of shame, you're going to need healthy people that you can bring that up and say, man, I just don't think I'm lovable because of this and this and this, and have them not go away and not stop loving you and stay connected and bring healing to that. The healing that happens at the emotional level isn't a magic wand. That healing happens when we eliminate or limit the destructive relationships that we are in and begin investing in and growing healthy relationships. Now, sometimes we think, all this pain, it happened way in the past. I'm going to forget the past. I want to live in the present. The problem with that is it's sort of like getting in a car accident 5 years ago and you never took your car to the mechanic, right? It's true that the car accident happened 5 years ago, but there's still a lot of problems on your car that are present, right? You have some things in the engine or in the body, some things that need to be fixed and need to be, made right. And that's what happens in our relational world, that even though it happened in the past, if we haven't availed ourselves of resources to process that and heal it, it's going to stick with us because it's still a present reality. So here's something I want you to understand when it comes to finding freedom, and that is this. You are only as healthy as the people you let in your heart, right? So if you let destructive people into your heart, if you let someone lie to you and gaslight you and use you and manipulate you, you can't be a healthy person if that's going on. That's going to create things in your heart that are going to harm you. You're only as healthy as the people you let in your heart. And if you're an adult, you get to decide who you let in your heart. In fact, you are the only person in the world who's responsible for deciding who you let into your heart. And so as you focus in on limiting these unhealthy relationships and growing new healthy relationships, that's going to create a whole new emotional world for you. And when that happens, then the top level stuff, when you no longer have a need to medicate or to bury, it just disappears all by itself. That's the way that works, because you no longer need it to be in survival mode. Now, here's the problem that we all have when it comes to choosing healthy relationships. And that is, even if you get out of a relationship that's unhealthy, you are going to choose a relationship that feels normal to you, and it's going to be the exact same one, right? Because whatever's normal to us is invisible to us. And unless we recognize why we choose those kind of relationships and what we need to do differently, we're going to end up in the same boat that we were in previously. And so it's really helpful to be aware, oh, wait a minute, I just choose things that feel normal to me, but what feels normal to me is not really normal. Now, let me suggest a few things that I think can accelerate your growth in this area and help you find freedom a lot faster. The first is, I would really encourage you to dig in and practice heart tools. The reason I've created heart tools is because we all have ways of relating that feel normal to us and yet are damaging to other people and to ourselves. We all think we have a lot of emotional intelligence and awareness, and we really don't. We all think we're really good at listening, and yet the people closest to us don't feel listened to, right? We think we're good at listening with empathy or listening with respect. We think we're good at appreciating, and we're not really good at it because we've never really been taught how do you do this well. And so what we've done with Heart Tools is try to break it down into very simple steps that if you do this one thing and practice this for a week, your relationships are going to improve, and the people in your world are going to be more loved next week than they are this week. The other thing that Heart Tools will help you do is it will help you identify the red flags of things to avoid in relationship, and relationships that you need to minimize or even cut off altogether, because you're only as healthy as the people you let into your heart. And if you let unhealthy people in your heart, it's going to cause you damage. So I would really encourage you to dig into Heart Tools, because what feels normal to you is not necessarily the healthy way to behave. The second thing I would suggest, if you really want to get going in this, is to join some sort of highly structured group that's focused in on growth in a particular area. So it could be a therapy group. It could be Alcoholics Anonymous or Al-Anon. It could be a Celebrate Recovery group. There's Celebrate Recovery groups for everything under the sun, whether it's procrastination or overeating or drugs and alcohol abuse or sexual addiction. There's all sorts of things. Get in a group, and I would suggest as you join a group, pay attention to two things, because groups are like families, right? There's really healthy families and there's really sick families. There's good groups and there's unhealthy groups that aren't going to help you at all. Pay attention to what are the guidelines of the group, and secondly, are they following the guidelines? If you get a group that has healthy guidelines and they're actually following the guidelines, that's going to be a group in which you're going to be able to process some of this painful emotions that you've stored up, and you're going to create a new sense of connection and well-being that you've never had before. And that's one of the powerful things about being in one of those highly structured groups. Now, a third thing I will suggest is, if you have PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, I would suggest there's another step you need to take before these other two. And you may be wondering, how do I know if I have PTSD? After all, a lot of us have experienced trauma in life. A lot of us have gone through some really bad things. How do you know if you have post-traumatic stress? Well, here's the difference. Even though a lot of us have experienced trauma, when we recall those memories, we recall them as something that happened 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 years ago, and there's this distance, and even though we may have some work to do with that trauma, if we haven't done it yet, we may have to figure out how that trauma impacted our view of ourselves and our relational patterns and those sorts of things. It's still something that is in our past. And so when we think about it, we may not feel unsafe or scared. With post-traumatic stress, what happens is there are certain types of trauma or certain conditions in which trauma is experienced that causes the brain to store that memory actually in a different part of the brain. And then when we recall that memory, or when that memory gets triggered, it's not something that happened 10 years ago or 30 years ago. We experience it as something that's happening right now. And so we have all of the terror or all of the rage or whatever pain was part of that original traumatic experience. We are experiencing it as if it is happening now. And so if that feels like maybe that's what's happening to you, and each time you try to, do some recovery work, it just brings up all this real intense terror or pain, then you may have to do some work with the post-traumatic stress disorder. And fortunately, there are some therapies available now that are quite remarkable. And what they do is they just help you, they help your brain take that memory that you're experiencing as a present reality, and it helps your brain store it with other memories as just a typical memory, so that you can think about it without all the intense emotional experience. And so one of the things I've realized recently is you can't 12-step your way out of PTSD. And so if that sounds like that's something that you're struggling with, then I would suggest just getting a therapist that specializes in PTSD and just describing what you're experiencing and that you want help with that. And that can actually happen fairly quickly. And then you can get on to the business of learning relationship skills and doing some group work where you build some really healthy relationships. I would suggest before you do these things, sit down for a few minutes sometime and just write out a list of what you believe: I'm only lovable if, and I'm not lovable because. And just get those down on paper and recognize that is something that's keeping you from actually experiencing love, because you want to take that with you into these new healthy relationships, and you want to test it, right? I'm only lovable if I'm perfect, so I'm not going to be perfect and see if people love me anyway. I'm not lovable because of this thing that I did 22 years ago. I'm going to tell someone about it and see if they love me anyway, right? Now that's going to take a while, because that may be really risky, but you want to challenge those in healthy relationship, and that's when your sense of identity and your belief system changes. You can't change it in a vacuum. Again, you change that in loving relationships. I'm hoping that one thing you've experienced as you've watched this is, oh my goodness, of course I struggle with all these things. How could I not struggle with these out of control behaviors, these over control behaviors, when all this is going on emotionally and in relational patterns and in how I view myself? I hope that you're beginning to see that you're actually a very complex person with a very complex history, and that the people you love are very complex people with very complex histories. And I hope that gives you a little bit of grace for yourself and a little bit of patience for yourself. And I hope that it brings in you a commitment to love others well and create an environment where they can thrive, while at the same time seeking and creating relationships with people who will love you well and create an environment where you can thrive. And as I said, at Heart Tools, we've created a step-by-step guide to help you master all of the skill sets you need to master to create healthy, thriving relationships where people can grow and prosper. Please help us make more videos by subscribing to Heart Tools, by liking this video, and by sharing it with others that you think may appreciate it.